You can break the canopy into several different community types. There are a group of insects that feed on the vegetative shoots and the cones of the Sitka spruce trees. Then there seems to be a group of insects that focus in and are dominant or appear on the branches. And some of the most interesting things we're finding are on the thick moss mats, which are about 1 to 2 centimeters deep, and then they are, underlying that is a 4 to 5 centimeter dirt, sort of dirt mat. Now in that particular microhabitat, we're finding what I think is a very distinct community. We're not finding, the insects and arthropods that we're finding in that community are not found anywhere else. They're not found on the forest floor. They're not found in what we call the transition zone. They're not found in moss mats anywhere else, and certainly aren't found in the clear-cut areas. What we have here is something that's probably been isolated for thousands of years from their ground counterparts, if you will, and through the process of speciation have developed a distinct community. And that community is certainly specific to the canopy in these Sitka spruce trees. Old growth forest, we know really very little about. Anybody that says they can manage an old growth forest, I think is absolutely incorrect. I mean, you cannot manage an area when you don't know the component parts. And we're proving time and time again with a study that they don't even know, they can't even put names on the fauna that we're finding. And so it's very hard to manage for that. And insects are an integral part of this community. They make this particular system run. And you can ask any forester or anybody that deals with plantations and clear cuts and tree planting what one of the #1 problems is, and it's insect pests. Well, why do we have such insect outbreaks in tree plantations and clear cuts where virtually it's resistant in these types of forests that we're dealing with, these old growth forests? It's dominated by a predator-parasitoid community. It's not dominated by herbivores that cause all this damage that we're finding in secondary growth areas. What you got to realize is that a clear cut is a catastrophic disturbance that occurs in a very short time. And very few of these insect arthropods are adapted, if you will, to deal with that sort of situation. They essentially are extirpated and at the population level definitely go extinct. And coupled with that, the insects that we're dealing with at the top of the canopy seem a component of that are canopy specific. They do not occur anywhere else. And you're not going to ever see these large Sitka spruce with these moss mats that have taken thousands of years to develop. You're not going to see that. And hence, if you get rid of that type of habitat, then you've essentially doomed those species to extinction.
Even in Europe, where they've gone rotation after rotation, it appears that the ecosystems are becoming simpler and simpler. You end up with just basically rows of trees that were planted and grass underneath them. You don't have all the other infrastructure, the complex interrelationships between insects and mycorrhizal organisms and mushrooms and decaying organisms and all the birds, and all that's basically gone. And you've got a plantation that's a hugely simplified, man-made, quote, ecosystem that takes massive inputs of fertilizer to keep going. You have to spray it with pesticides because it has no natural enemies, and you end up with something that we can only maintain today because we have fossil fuels to throw at the problem. But if we didn't have that fossil fuels, there would be no way that man could maintain these kind of forests. And in areas gradually go and are not forested anymore. And so the long run, if they'll never make another rotation as they have now. And in the long run, you're depleting your biological capital.
One of the big unanswered questions that makes me uncomfortable, and I don't really know the answer to, is the effect of replanting a single species where a multiple existed before.
But that is the only possibility which you are offering this country.
Yeah, well, I think that the best, and I think it's only a half answer, but I think the best answer to that is that the way the logging progresses in small increments, let's say if one assumes an 80-year life cycle and 80th is done each year, you're logging next always to a natural system that may influence what you have cut and replanted. That's a very difficult question, and I think that that's probably the big one to be answered that I don't know how to do, but certainly you can't give the European forests as an example of an answer to that because they are unbelievably, you might say, sterile. I was in a German forest in September where it was really quite eerie. They had it all tended with more foresters per acre than I've ever heard of. And there were no birds, there were no bugs, there were no weeds, there were just trees. And they were all the same kind of tree, and they were showing, I was there because some of these trees were said to be dying from acid rain.
I think that the first thing we have to acknowledge is that if we look at old growth, that it is not a renewable resource in the context of our forest management policies. We plan to harvest in this particular forest, TFL 39, on an average of 80 years, and that has quite a range, perhaps from 50 years to 150 years, to optimize the fiber yield on given stands. But the average is 80 years, and that does not produce the kinds of old-growth forests that we're harvesting today. So the notion has always been that the resource that we inherited in coastal British Columbia were these magnificent old-growth stands, large volumes per hectare, large trees. Once that had been harvested, we would be on what we call a second growth economy, meaning the trees that we would harvest in the second pass and third pass would be much smaller.
That the companies have said, we are going to log pretty well every stick of wood. So they've thrown into the inventory a whole bunch of areas that nobody ever thought would be logged. And a lot of those are very sensitive areas as well. Steep slopes, way up on mountainsides that are alpine-like areas. And they've also said that they're going to take the trees faster, the rotation will be shorter. So instead of waiting for the trees to grow back for 120 years, which the original cuts were predicated on, and then it dropped down to 90 years, and then 85 years average, and then 70 years. And so the rotation age has been lowered as well. And basically they built factories that will grind up all this stuff and make it into pulp and saw it up into logs. So we have factories that also demand a certain wood supply, which is more than nature can grow it back. And you get out there in the November storm when it's rained 3 or 4 inches and drive down one of these logging roads and it's a sea of mud out there. Whole mountainsides are letting loose. There's a lot of small particle loss of soils, and you can drive to many, many places. You can look up, you can see a stump there, and you can see the roots, and they're sitting on bare rocks now. So all the soil that was there has washed away. And if you look up on the mountainsides, where they logged mountainsides that were steep, 10 or 15 years ago, you can see the trees are barely growing back. If they are, they're really scattered. They're very tiny. There's no soil left up there.
This area is in the Upper Carmanah Valley, and it is the area in the valley that's been clear cut. And we can see some of the things that are happening as a result of the clear cutting. In this little stream here, which is part of the headwaters of the Upper Carmanah, we've got these great balls of debris, wood, sometimes 30 feet deep, laying on top of the stream that have been now washed down from the clear cut. These big debris masses are all the way up this stream. 5, 10, 15 years, or maybe even this winter, those will pop in a big flood, come down the stream in a ball of mud and debris and scour what's left of the soil and the stream bed right out, possibly all the way down to the old growth forest.